So my mother gets home, and I'm in third grade, and she says, "How was your day at school?" And I look at her in the eyes and I say, "Mom, it was fantastic. I'm now in special ed." Now let me give you some backstory here. My earliest known memory is getting the Dr. Seuss books out of the mail when I was 4 years old and reading them to my baby brother on an Afghan that my grandmother had sewn in the middle of my living room. And I had traveled to so many crazy worlds in my youth, reading The Hobbit by the time I was 7 with my father, and going through the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and having read as many Hardy Boys books as I could find. And darn it, Nancy Drew was pretty good too. And I loved to read. And so my mother looked aghast. "Why are you in special ed?" And I didn't understand then, but I said, "Well, it's because the teacher told me to go to special ed." And so my mother took me to the school the next week and said, "Okay, I don't understand. My son says he's in special ed." And the teacher said, "Well, he is." See, there's this thing called SRAs. They're arranged in colors from red through purple, and they're these like little laminated sheets, and you had to read the front of them and answer the questions on the back of them. And by the time I finished the first quarter of my third grade year, I had done all of the reds through all of the purples. There was nothing left for me to do. And so the teacher, deciding that there was probably better use of my talents, sent me to special ed, which introduced me to a whole new world. They asked me to teach little children who had special needs to read. And I remember my mother and my father, both of which who had education degrees and never went into teaching because they needed to take care of a family and work 2 jobs, they would tutor in the evenings. And so I remember watching my mother trying to get sound things out in phonics, and I remember watching my father with students that were mentally challenged, really help them to try to perceive the world in a different way. And so while I was down in special ed, I used to read Tom and Dick and Jane books to these little boys and girls, and I used to read them, and I used to try to act like my mother and my father, and I loved reading special ed to these little kids. And it was the way for the teachers to get through to me. I went to a very small elementary school in a town of under 9,000 people. And then in 4th grade, they decided they would start a gifted and talented program, and so 6 of us would go to the gifted and talented program, and so I never went to special ed again. But it stuck with me, this special world that I had this chance to be in when I was in 3rd grade. And when I continued to volunteer through my middle school and my high school days, it really stuck to me that helping kids to learn to read was really important, to expose them to the very special world that I had been exposed to throughout my life. And so when I got to college and they said, "We're going to give you a work-study program," they invited me to join the community volunteerism program. And so the first thing I did was search for the nearest elementary school, and that was March Elementary School right down the street. And I started this program called March After School Help, MASH, and I collected a whole bunch of friends from school, and I would sit in the student rec center, and I'd say, "Hey, come, we're going to volunteer. We're going to volunteer at the local elementary school, and we're going to teach the children to read, and we're going to help them with phonics, and we're going to help them with their math, and we're going to help them." It's a tutoring program, and it'll give you something to do that'll just take your mind off all this Calc 3 and all these engineering classes that you're in. And so I collected 30 people, and on the first day, we had all these students that were there in Marsh Elementary School that were at MASH. And it was a little bumpy ride a little bit because we had to kind of, as college students, try to relate again to little elementary school kids, but it was wonderful. And so I walked home with a smile. I remember it was one of these beautiful days in Easton, Pennsylvania, where the sunlight was kind of filtering through the trees, and you just kind of felt special. And Lafayette's got this beautiful quad that you can walk across, and it's grassy, and all the buildings are old and have this majesty to them. And I felt so good. So I immediately grabbed a phone and I called my mom, and I said, "Mom, I'm in special ed again."